The diner was loud, until a young black waitress started signing to a deaf old woman no one bothered to notice. Within seconds, the whole room went silent. What happened next changed both their lives forever. The diner door chimed softly, its bell breaking the quiet hum of late evening chatter. A cool wind rushed in as an elderly woman stepped through, her silver hair neatly pinned beneath a small hat, her cane tapping gently against the tiled floor like a slow heartbeat. She paused at the entrance, eyes scanning the room filled with people too busy with their meals and phones to notice her. The smell of coffee and fried bacon lingered in the air. It was one of those small-town diners where regulars came every night, where the booths were torn at the edges and the walls told stories through old photos and yellowed newspaper clippings. No one looked up except one person, Amara, a young black waitress in a faded uniform, hair tied back under a red bandana, stood by the counter refilling salt shakers. Her eyes, warm but tired, caught the old woman's hesitation. Something about her, fragile yet dignified, pulled Amara's heart toward her. It had been a long day, 10 hours straight on her feet, running from booth to booth, serving customers who often didn't even meet her eyes when they handed her tips, if they left any at all. Her apron was stained, her back ached, and her manager had already yelled twice about being too slow. But still, when she saw the elderly woman struggling to find a seat, Amara didn't hesitate. She set down her tray and hurried over. "Good evening, ma'am," she said gently, her voice warm like honey. "Can I help you to a seat?" The woman looked up. Her eyes were soft, kind, but distant, like she was looking through Amara, not at her. She didn't answer. Amara tilted her head, thinking maybe the woman hadn't heard her. So she tried again, a little louder this time. "Would you like a booth, ma'am?" Still no response. Before Amara could say anything else, a man at the counter, one of the regulars, snorted. "She's deaf," he muttered. "Don't bother. She comes in sometimes, never says a word, just points at the menu and writes stuff down." Amara glanced back at him, frowning slightly. Then she turned again to the old woman, who now stood awkwardly near an empty booth, clutching her small purse as if it were a shield. Most people would have taken the man's advice and walked away. But Amara didn't move. Something in her refused to just serve and walk away like it was nothing. Maybe it was because she'd seen that same look before, loneliness mixed with the quiet embarrassment of being misunderstood. The world could be so loud, so cruel, and yet so silent for people who couldn't hear it. She took a slow breath, then did something that made the entire diner pause. Amara set down her notepad, straightened her posture, and slowly raised her hands. Then, with calm and careful movements, she began to sign. The woman froze. Her eyes widened as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Her wrinkled hands trembled before she signed back. "You know sign language?" A small smile bloomed on Amara's face. "A little," she signed in response. "Enough to serve you right." The old woman's lips curved into a silent laugh. Her face lit up not with surprise anymore, but with something warmer. Relief. Joy. The diner, once filled with clinking plates and idle chatter, suddenly fell silent. A few customers turned to watch as Amara gently guided the woman to a booth by the window, helping her sit down. It was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that felt empty. It was the kind of silence that meant something. Amara handed her the menu and, through signs, asked, "What would you like to eat?" The woman's name, she soon learned, was Evelyn. Evelyn smiled, eyes twinkling. "Soup. With bread. And maybe coffee if it's fresh." Amara chuckled softly and signed back, "I'll make sure it's the best in the house." She turned and headed to the kitchen, but as she passed the counter, the same man who had told her not to bother spoke again. "Didn't know you could do that," he said, sounding almost ashamed. Amara just smiled faintly. "Most people don't ask what I can do." When she returned with the soup, she found Evelyn gazing out the window, her expression calm but thoughtful. Amara placed the bowl gently in front of her, setting down the spoon and napkin with care. Then, before walking away, she signed again. "Careful. It's hot." Evelyn laughed silently, covering her mouth with one hand. Then she signed something that made Amara pause. "You remind me of my granddaughter," Evelyn said. She was kind too. Always tried to learn my world instead of forcing me into hers. Amara's throat tightened. She smiled softly and signed back, "She must miss you." Evelyn looked down. She passed away 3 years ago. A beat of silence. The sound of plates clattering in the distance faded into nothing. Amara hesitated, then reached out and gently touched Evelyn's hand. "I'm sorry." Evelyn smiled through the sadness. "Don't be. I see a bit of her in you." Something about those words hit Amara deep. She wasn't used to being seen like that. Not just as a waitress, not just as someone serving food, but as a person. Minutes passed. They didn't need many words. Just hands, eyes, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the best conversations are the ones you don't speak at all. People in the diner began whispering, curious, even moved. A few took out their phones, recording discreetly as the two women continued signing, laughing softly, sharing stories only their hands could tell. For the first time that night, the diner didn't sound like a place full of strangers. It felt human, connected. When Evelyn finished her meal, she signed, "You're very special, my dear." Amara blushed, shaking her head. "I'm just doing my job." But Evelyn shook hers too. "No, you're doing more. You're listening, with your heart." As Amara helped her to the door, Evelyn reached into her purse and pulled out a small, folded note. She pressed it into Amara's palm, smiled one last time, and walked out into the cool night air. When Amara unfolded the paper later, she found words written in neat, delicate handwriting. "Kindness is a language even the deaf can hear. Thank you for reminding me that goodness still exists." Amara stood still for a long moment, tears welling in her eyes. For once, after years of feeling invisible, someone had truly seen her. And that night, though she didn't know it yet, was just the beginning of something that would change her life forever. As the minutes passed, something beautiful began to unfold inside that small-town diner. The room that once buzzed with idle chatter and clinking dishes now seemed to soften around them. The young black waitress with gentle hands and the elegant deaf grandmother with eyes full of history. They spoke in silence, their hands dancing gracefully in midair, weaving a conversation no one else could hear, but everyone could feel. Her name, Amara learned, was Evelyn Carter, a retired schoolteacher from Chicago. She was in town visiting her grandson, Lucas Carter, who was known for his $1 million company, endless business meetings, and a lifestyle of wealth and precision. He was supposed to pick her up after his meeting, but as usual, business had come first. Evelyn smiled softly when she mentioned him, though her eyes carried the faint loneliness of someone used to waiting. Amara nodded understandingly. "He must be very busy," she signed. Evelyn chuckled. "Busy, yes. Present? Not always." Amara smiled at the honesty. She didn't need to ask more, she understood. She placed a warm bowl of soup before Evelyn, steam rising gently into the golden diner light. Carefully, she signed each word. "Hot soup. Not spicy. Bread with butter." Evelyn's eyes twinkled. She laughed silently, pressing her hand to her chest, signing back, "You're the first person today who made me feel seen." Those words hit Amara deep. She smiled, but inside something stirred, a quiet ache she hadn't felt in a long time, because she knew what it was like to feel invisible. For years, she had worked double shifts to support her younger brother, Caleb, ever since their parents had died in a car accident. Caleb was born deaf, and for a long time, Amara couldn't communicate with him beyond gestures and smiles. People saw her every day, at the diner, at the grocery store, on the bus, but nobody really saw her. Not her exhaustion, not her silent tears, not the dreams she had buried beneath bills and responsibilities. And now this kind, elegant woman who couldn't even hear her voice was telling her, "You made me feel seen." It was as if life had come full circle. Amara's fingers moved again, slow and sincere. Everyone deserves to be understood. Evelyn smiled and touched her hand gently. "You have a beautiful heart, my dear." At that moment, the bell over the diner door chimed again, sharp, impatient. A tall man stepped inside, the kind of man who carried his wealth like armor. tailored gray suit, expensive watch, the faint smell of cologne that cost more than Amara's monthly rent. His phone was glued to his ear, his tone clipped and commanding. "Yes, close the deal by tomorrow morning," he said briskly. No excuses. He barely glanced around before spotting Evelyn in the corner booth. "Grandma," he said, pocketing his phone. "I told you not to come here alone." The warmth in the room dimmed a little. His voice was firm, not cruel, but full of impatience. He walked quickly toward her, pulling out her chair like she was a child who'd misbehaved. Evelyn frowned, signing something sharp, her hands moving with surprising speed. Lucas blinked. "What?" He looked around, confused, then sighed. "I can't read your hands, Grandma. Please, can we just go?" The old woman shook her head, refusing to stand. Amara, standing nearby with a coffee pot, hesitated. The room had gone quiet again. She could feel everyone's eyes flicking between the wealthy man and the old lady who refused to move. Finally, Evelyn looked up at Amara and pointed to her hands, urging her to translate. Amara took a breath, glanced at Lucas, and said softly, she said, "This young lady has more manners than you, Lucas." For a moment, silence. Then someone at the counter snorted. Another laughed. And within seconds, the entire diner broke into light chuckles. Lucas blinked, caught off guard. "What?" He looked around, his cheeks flushing. "Did she really?" Amara nodded politely, trying not to laugh herself. Evelyn smirked triumphantly, folding her arms like a queen who had just delivered justice. Lucas sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "She's always been honest," he muttered. Amara smiled, setting down the coffee pot. "That's not a bad thing," she said softly. Lucas finally looked at her properly. For the first time since entering, he noticed her, not just as a waitress, but as a person. Her kind eyes, her patient posture, the warmth she radiated. He frowned slightly. "You know sign language?" Amara nodded. "A bit. My brother is deaf. I learned so I could talk to him." Something shifted in Lucas's expression, a flicker of surprise, maybe even respect. He sat down slowly beside his grandmother. "You must have studied for years," he said. Amara shook her head with a small smile. "No, I couldn't afford classes. I watched free videos online after my shifts. Took me 2 years to say I love you to my brother the right way." Evelyn smiled proudly, signing to Lucas. "See? Heart before money." Lucas chuckled softly, shaking his head. "You're impossible, Grandma." Amara watched the two of them, smiling. For all his wealth and polish, Lucas looked almost boyish beside her, a grandson being gently scolded by the woman who raised him. "Would you like some coffee, Mr. Carter?" she asked. He glanced at her name tag. "Amara, right?" "Sure. Black, no sugar." As she poured his cup, he found himself asking, "How long have you worked here?" "Almost 5 years," she replied. "It pays the bills." He nodded quietly. He didn't know why, but something about her calmness intrigued him. There was strength in her simplicity, the kind of strength he'd never had to find because money had always protected him from struggle. Evelyn watched them both, her lips curved into a knowing smile. She could already see what Lucas couldn't, that this encounter was about to change him. When they finished eating, Lucas stood up to pay. As he reached for his wallet, Evelyn signed something again. Amara hesitated, then smiled as she translated. She says, "Tip generously." "This young woman gave you a lesson in humility tonight." The diners laughed again. Lucas sighed, but smiled too. He placed a few bills on the table, more than enough, and looked at Amara with quiet gratitude. "Thank you," he said sincerely this time. "For what?" "For being kind to her. For understanding what most people don't." Amara simply nodded. "She's easy to understand," she said softly. "You just have to listen with your eyes." Evelyn patted her grandson's arm and signed one final message. "Listen with your heart, Lucas." He watched her hands move, then glanced back at Amara. And for the first time in a long while, he wondered if maybe his grandmother was right. Maybe there were still people in the world who spoke the language of kindness, not words. As they left the diner, Evelyn looked back one last time, smiling at Amara. She raised her hand, signing gently, "Thank you." Amara returned the sign with a bright smile. "You're welcome." The bell above the door chimed again as they stepped into the night. But the silence that lingered wasn't empty. It was full of meaning. Because that evening, two strangers from different worlds had spoken a language that neither time, nor wealth, nor distance could ever silence again. And though Amara didn't know it yet, that small act of kindness, serving soup, signing a few words, offering understanding, would soon ripple far beyond that diner's walls. It was only the beginning. The diner was quiet that night. The neon sign outside flickered against the window, casting soft red and blue glows across empty booths. It was well past closing time. The last pot of coffee had gone cold. Amara moved from table to table, humming softly as she wiped away crumbs and stacked plates. Her feet ached, but there was peace in the stillness, the kind of calm that comes after a long day when the world finally stops spinning. The door chimed. Amara glanced up, surprised. No one ever came in this late. She almost called out that they were closed, but then she saw him. Lucas Carter. The same man from earlier that day, sharp suit, expensive shoes, the confident walk of someone used to doors opening for him. Only this time, he looked different. The phone was gone from his hand. His eyes weren't on a screen, they were on her. He walked up quietly and said, "I owe you an apology." Amara blinked, setting her cloth down. "For what?" "For earlier. I didn't realize you could sign. My grandmother hasn't smiled like that in months." For a moment, she didn't know what to say. She wasn't used to people like him apologizing, especially not to her. She gave a small, polite smile. "She's wonderful," Amara said. "You're lucky to have her." Lucas nodded, taking a seat at the nearest booth. "I know. She practically raised me." He looked down almost sheepish. "I guess I forget how amazing she is sometimes." Amara smiled faintly. "It happens." A pause. The only sound was the faint hum of the fridge and the distant whistle of the wind outside. Then Lucas leaned forward slightly. "Where did you learn sign language?" Amara froze. No one had ever really asked her that before. People were impressed sometimes, yes, but they didn't ask. They didn't care. She hesitated, wiping her hands on her apron before sitting down across from him. Her voice came out quiet, almost fragile. "My little brother, Caleb, he's deaf," she said softly. "He lost his hearing when he was 3. We couldn't afford special schools or classes. So I decided if he couldn't enter my world, I'd learn to enter his." Lucas frowned slightly, leaning in. "I didn't have a laptop back then," she continued. "So every night after work, I'd borrow the diner's Wi-Fi and watch free sign language videos on my phone. I practiced with my hands until they cramped. Some nights, I'd fall asleep at the counter, dreaming of moving my fingers right." She smiled a little at the memory. "It took me 2 years before I could tell him I loved him, in his language." Lucas didn't move for several seconds. His eyes softened, the weight of her words sinking in. He had grown up in penthouses and private schools, where everything was handed to him, tutors, classes, coaches. He'd never had to fight for knowledge, never had to learn something just to make someone feel loved. Now, sitting across from a tired waitress in a near-empty diner, he felt small. "Wow," he murmured. "That's unbelievable." Amara shrugged gently, her gaze drifting to the window. "Love makes you do impossible things," she said simply. That line lingered in the air, echoing louder than anything else. Lucas looked at her, really looked at her. The quiet strength in her voice, the calluses on her hands, the kindness in her eyes that hadn't dimmed despite exhaustion and struggle. She wasn't rich, but there was a kind of wealth in her that money couldn't buy. "How old is your brother now?" he asked. 10, she said, her expression softening. "He's the reason I keep going. Every morning, before work, I make him breakfast, pack his lunch, drop him at school. Then I come here. Then I go home, help him with homework, and we practice signing together before bed." "That's a lot," Lucas said quietly. She chuckled. "Yeah, it is. But when he smiles, it's worth it." He smiled back, but there was a sadness in his eyes. He envied that kind of love, the selfless, unconditional kind. His world was full of contracts and deals, not connection. He realized, sitting there, that maybe he'd forgotten what real care looked like. "You must be tired," he said. Amara nodded, laughing lightly. Always. They both smiled. Two very different worlds meeting in the middle of a diner at midnight. Lucas cleared his throat. You know, my grandmother talks about people like you. People like me? She says there are angels that walk the earth quietly, he said, half smiling. Not the kind with wings, the kind who show up when others look away. Amara blushed lightly, shaking her head. I'm no angel. Just a girl trying to make things work. He didn't argue, but deep down he disagreed. He glanced around. Is your manager here? She chuckled. No, thank God. He leaves early. Why? Lucas grinned. Good. Because I think you deserve a break. She raised an eyebrow. You came all the way back here to tell me that? He leaned back, smiling. Maybe. There was a pause, one of those moments where time seemed to slow, where words weren't needed. Finally, he stood. I should go. Early morning tomorrow. Amara nodded, standing too. Thanks for stopping by. And tell your grandmother I said good night. He smiled faintly. I will. He hesitated at the door, then turned back one last time. Amara. Yes. He looked thoughtful. That thing you said about love making you do impossible things. She tilted her head. What about it? He smiled softly. I think you're right. Maybe I've just been loving the wrong things. Amara didn't reply, but the look in her eyes said everything. When Lucas left, the bell over the door jingled again, the sound gentle, almost hopeful. Amara watched his car disappear into the night. The diner fell quiet once more, but something inside her had changed. And miles away, driving through the city lights, Lucas Carter replayed her words over and over in his head. Love makes you do impossible things. For a man who measured life in profits and percentages, those words were more valuable than anything he owned. And though he didn't know it yet, that one sentence, spoken by a waitress in a faded apron, was about to change everything about how he saw the world. A week later, the quiet little diner that usually smelled of coffee and bacon was buzzing like never before. Customers whispered, the cook peeked out from the kitchen, and the manager nervously adjusted his tie. A sleek black luxury car pulled up outside, its tinted windows reflecting the neon sign that read Maggie's Diner, home of homemade happiness. When the door opened, everyone gasped. Out stepped Lucas Carter, the same millionaire who'd once brushed past the waitress without a glance. But this time, he wasn't holding a phone. He was holding a bouquet of white lilies, his late grandmother's favorite flower, and behind him trailed a small film crew with cameras and lights. Every head turned as he walked in. Amara stood frozen, clutching a tray, her eyes wide. Mr. Carter, she asked nervously. Can I help you? Lucas smiled softly. Actually, I think I'm here to thank you. He motioned to one of the crew members, who began filming. The diner lights seemed to glow a little warmer, reflecting off the silverware and glass jars of sugar. You're trending on my company's social page, Lucas said, setting the flowers on the counter. The video of you signing with my grandmother went viral. Over 3 million views in just a few days. Amara blinked in disbelief. Viral? But I didn't post anything. Lucas chuckled, a hint of nostalgia in his eyes. My grandma did, he said. She told me the world needed to see what kindness looks like. She said she wanted everyone to meet the waitress who spoke with her heart. The diner went completely silent. Even the sound of sizzling bacon in the kitchen seemed to fade away. Amara's hands trembled slightly. She looked down, trying to process what she'd just heard. Lucas continued, his voice calm but filled with sincerity. I owe you more than an apology now. You reminded me what connection really means, and you reminded my grandmother that she still mattered. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a white envelope sealed with gold lettering. Inside, he said, is a scholarship fund in your name, enough for you to finish school, or take sign language interpreter training, or whatever dream you've been putting off. Amara's eyes filled with tears before she could even open it. I can't accept this, she whispered. I was just doing my job. Lucas smiled, shaking his head. No, Amara. You did so much more than that. He took a deep breath, then turned to the camera crew. I've decided to start a new division in my company, the Evelyn Foundation for Communication Access. The words made Evelyn, who was sitting proudly in her usual corner booth, sit up straighter, her face glowing. Lucas continued, "We're going to fund interpreters, train staff in restaurants and hospitals, and offer free sign language education. Because no one should feel invisible just because they can't hear." The diner erupted in applause. Some customers even stood. A man at the counter wiped his eyes and muttered, "About time someone did something like that." Amara was speechless. She held the envelope tightly to her chest, still shaking her head in disbelief. "Why me?" she finally whispered. Lucas stepped closer, his voice gentle. "Because you did what most people forget to do. You listened, even when there were no words." Evelyn smiled wide, her wrinkled hands signing something with pride and mischief. Lucas turned to Amara with a grin. "She says, told you she's special." The diner filled with laughter. Amara let out a small sob and laughed too, covering her mouth. It was the kind of moment that felt too big for words, and yet, somehow, perfectly quiet at the same time. Lucas gestured toward the camera crew again. "She also wants to film a short message for everyone watching online," he said. Then, turning to his grandmother, he signed slowly, "Ready when you are." Evelyn's eyes sparkled. She signed back with grace and confidence, her hands moving beautifully. Kindness has no volume. You don't need a voice to make someone feel heard. The camera light blinked red as the room fell into stillness. Every person in that diner, waiters, cooks, strangers eating pie, felt something shift inside them. The video would later rack up millions of shares, touching hearts around the world. People commented things like "faith in humanity restored," and "the world needs more Amaras." But for Amara, none of that mattered as much as the moment itself. Evelyn reached out, taking Amara's hand. She traced the words gently on Amara's palm, "Thank you for seeing me." Amara smiled through tears, her voice trembling as she said softly, "No, Mrs. Carter, thank you for reminding me that kindness still matters." Lucas watched them both, his expression full of something he hadn't felt in a long time, humility. He looked at Amara and said quietly, "You once told me love makes you do impossible things. You were right." Then he gestured to the scholarship check. "Go make some impossible things happen." Amara nodded slowly, her tears finally falling. "I will," she whispered. "I promise." As the camera crew packed up, Evelyn signed one last thing to her grandson. "Now you start learning sign language. You've got no excuse." Lucas laughed. "Yes, ma'am," he said, smiling toward Amara. And for the first time in a long time, the millionaire, the deaf grandmother, and the humble waitress sat together, sharing coffee, laughter, and a new beginning. Outside, the neon diner sign flickered softly against the night sky. Inside, hearts spoke louder than words ever could. Months passed, and the world had changed for Amara in ways she could never have imagined. The once overlooked waitress, who spoke through kindness, was now the face of a growing movement, a symbol of connection in a world too busy to listen. That night, she stood backstage at the Grand Civic Hall, hands trembling slightly as the announcer's voice echoed across the vast room. "Please welcome the founder of the Amara Foundation for the Deaf and Hearing, Miss Amara Williams." Applause thundered through the hall. Bright lights illuminated the stage as Amara stepped out, wearing a simple white dress that shimmered softly under the spotlight. It wasn't designer, it wasn't flashy, but it was hers. Behind her, a giant banner read, "The Amara Foundation, Bridging Silence with Love." Her heart pounded as she looked across the sea of faces. Journalists, families, donors, even celebrities, all had gathered to celebrate her story. But what mattered most to her sat right in the front row, Lucas Carter, smiling proudly beside his grandmother Evelyn, who was beaming with joy, and Caleb, Amara's little brother, wearing his best suit and waving excitedly. The sight made her throat tighten. She took a deep breath, gripping the edges of the podium. "Years ago," Amara began, her voice trembling slightly, "I thought my life was too small to matter. I was just a waitress, working late nights and double shifts, trying to make ends meet." She paused, eyes scanning the crowd. "But one night, everything changed. Not because I did something grand, but because I chose to care. Because I chose to listen, even when there were no words." The hall grew silent. Even the sound of cameras faded. She smiled faintly. I didn't know that night would change everything, for me, for someone else, and maybe for a small corner of the world. Her voice softened, and her hands began to move gracefully, signing as she spoke. You don't need money. You don't need fame. You just need to care. Every hand in the audience stilled. Evelyn's eyes glistened with pride as Amara raised her hands once more and signed, slowly, beautifully. Love is the loudest language of all. For a few heartbeats, the hall was completely still. No sound, just emotion. Then, the silence broke into an explosion of applause. People rose to their feet. Cameras flashed. Some wiped their eyes. The moment was pure, real, unforgettable. Caleb jumped from his seat, clapping wildly. Lucas stood too, smiling like a proud friend. Or maybe something deeper. Even Evelyn, in her graceful old age, stood up, signing to Amara from the audience. The world hears you now. Tears welled in Amara's eyes as Lucas and Evelyn made their way onto the stage. Lucas leaned close and whispered so only she could hear. You didn't just serve a customer that night, Amara. You served humanity. Those words hit harder than applause ever could. Evelyn wrapped her arms around Amara, her silver hair glowing beneath the stage lights. Then she signed with a warm smile. You gave voice to silence. That's more powerful than anything I've ever seen. As the lights dimmed to a soft golden hue, a large screen behind them lit up, showing clips from the viral video. The night Amara had signed with Evelyn in the diner. The world watched once again as that simple act of empathy rippled into something monumental. The screen transitioned to new footage, classrooms filled with children, both deaf and hearing, learning sign language together. A little girl with hearing aids giggling as her teacher signed, "Good morning." A nurse signing, "Are you okay?" to a patient. A restaurant manager signing, "Thank you" to his staff. Every clip bore the same small logo at the corner, the Amara Foundation. Amara turned to the crowd, her voice steady now. "This," she said, gesturing to the screen, "is not just my story. It's our story. Every time you take a moment to understand someone, every time you choose kindness over convenience, you speak the loudest language there is." Applause rose again, echoing like waves. Lucas stepped forward to the microphone. "I used to think power was about money and success," he said, his tone heartfelt. "But Amara showed me real power is being able to make someone feel seen." Evelyn signed proudly beside him as he spoke, her fingers moving in rhythm with his words. Then Lucas smiled toward Amara. "And as of tonight, the Amara Foundation will expand to 5 more cities and offer free classes for parents, teachers, and children. Because connection shouldn't be a privilege. It should be a right." The crowd roared in approval. Amara looked out into the sea of faces, overwhelmed. She spotted Caleb in the front row, tears streaming down his cheeks. He raised his hands high, signing proudly, "I love you." Amara smiled through her own tears, signing back, "I love you more." The band began to play soft music as the lights shifted to a warm glow. Confetti fell gently from above, sparkling like falling stars. Amara looked at the people beside her, the millionaire who learned humility, the grandmother who never stopped believing, and the little brother who inspired it all. Her heart was full. The once tired waitress who spoke through silence now stood before the world, not as someone who served food, but as someone who served hope. And as the cameras zoomed in on her tearful smile, the narrator's voice could be heard closing the segment. Sometimes it's not the loudest voice that changes the world, but the quietest heart that dares to care. The screen faded to black. Text appeared. Inspired by true kindness. The Amara Foundation, love speaks louder. Sometimes it's not the wealth we leave behind that changes the world. It's the kindness we show when no one's watching. Amara didn't speak the loudest, but she was heard by millions. Because love doesn't need a voice. It just needs a heart brave enough to listen.